Have you ever felt like you're being crushed by emotions that aren't even yours? Like you walk into a room and suddenly you're drowning in invisible waves of tension, anxiety, grief, or rage, and you have no idea where it came from. Only that it's now alive inside your chest like it belongs to you. You tell yourself it's just a bad day, or that you're too sensitive. But deep down, you know something else is happening. Something you can't quite name. Because this isn't just emotional awareness. It's not intuition. It's something heavier, deeper, more consuming. What if I told you that this overwhelming sensitivity, the very thing that makes you question your own sanity, is not a flaw, but a sign that you've been caught in a psychological pattern more ancient and dangerous than you ever imagined? According to Carl Jung, you're not broken, you're not weak, you're not overly emotional. You're a mirror, and your life, your body, your nervous system have been hijacked by the collective shadow of the world around you. The truth is, empaths don't just feel, they absorb, they internalize. They become the unconscious emotional storage for everything others deny in themselves. You've been taught that this makes you special, spiritually gifted, noble. But that lie is exactly how the cycle sustains itself. Because when you believe that feeling everything is a divine duty, you don't question why you're chronically exhausted, why your mind races with anxiety that seems to have no root, why you lose your sense of self in every relationship, why you shrink in rooms filled with unspoken tension. You think you're broken, but you've just never been taught to see that your psyche has no filter, that what you call empathy is actually psychological porousness, an open gate through which other people's pain floods in unchecked. You're not sensitive, you're unshielded, and there's a cost. This is the real reason narcissists are drawn to you. It's not random, it's not fate. They're not attracted to your light, they're addicted to your capacity to carry what they refuse to face. They don't just manipulate, they offload. They need you to hold their shame, their buried rage, their fear of exposure. And you, with your raw, open spirit, take it in like it's yours. You become the emotional landfill for everything they deny. And they will call you too emotional, too reactive, too dramatic. Why? Because if you start trusting what you feel, if you start setting limits, if you stop carrying their shadow, the illusion shatters. Their identity depends on you staying unaware, on you thinking your pain is yours. But it's not. That overwhelming fatigue, that confusion about what's real and what isn't, those mood swings that strike without warning, you're not mentally unstable, you're overloaded. Your system is processing more than it was ever meant to. You're absorbing fragments of a world in denial, carrying guilt that isn't yours, sadness that doesn't belong to you, fear that originated somewhere else. And still you show up, still you care, still you try to heal what you didn't break. But what if healing isn't your role? What if this isn't a spiritual mission? What if it's a survival pattern? What if your body, your mind, your sensitivity were never designed to be a sponge butte, a mirror? And what if that mirror was never meant to absorb, but to reflect? Because Carl Jung didn't see empaths as healers. He saw them as mirrors of the unconscious, reflections of the shadow. He saw that people project what they cannot face onto others, and that the empath, with their porous psyche, becomes the perfect target. It's not about kindness. It's not about compassion. It's about psychology. You've become the vessel for everything disowned, and it's killing you slowly. But here's what changes everything. The moment you stop internalizing and start reflecting, the moment you see that what you feel isn't always yours, the moment you recognize the difference between absorption and awareness, that's when the transformation begins. Because the darkness you carry isn't just emotional, it's archetypal. It's not just about who hurt you. It's about what humanity refuses to face in itself. And you've been the silent recipient of this disowned shadow your whole life. But now, for the first time, you're waking up. You're beginning to see that this pain, this exhaustion, this madness, they're not signs of weakness. They're evidence of your role as a psychic mirror. The empath is not fragile. The empath is absorbing the collective unconscious. And once you realize that, you can begin to reclaim your identity, your energy, and your boundaries. You can begin the journey back to yourself, not as someone who feels everything, but as someone who chooses what they allow in. Because awareness is the first act of rebellion, and reflection is the first step to sovereignty. You've probably felt it before, that haunting intensity when you stand near someone and suddenly feel heavy, dizzy, angry, or sad, even though nothing actually happened. That moment you question whether what you're feeling is real or just in your head. The problem is, no one ever taught you how to separate your emotional truth from the unconscious baggage of others. You weren't trained to ask, "Is this mine?" You were trained to carry it quietly, to be nice, to be understanding, to be open. But openness without boundaries is self-erasure. And now you know. That's the real danger. You've been disappearing under the weight of emotions that don't belong to you. And yet, something inside you has survived. A quiet strength that's never left, even in the darkest moments. That strength isn't found in how much you can carry. It's found in how clearly you begin to see. You're not here to absorb the shadow. You're here to reveal it. Not through force, but through truth. Not by fixing others, but by becoming whole yourself. And that wholeness, that sovereignty is what the world fears the most. Because when you stop carrying what isn't yours, the people who relied on your silence, your self-abandonment, your spiritual exhaustion, they lose control. This is your wake-up call. Your suffering was never meaningless. It was the signal, the invitation, the warning. And now that you've heard it, you can't go back. Because you were never meant to be the empath who drowns in everyone else's pain. You were meant to be the mirror that shows them what they refuse to see. And once you reclaim that power, the world around you begins to change whether it wants to or not. Jung called it the shadow. Not just a metaphor, but a living force in the psyche, part of ourselves we repress, deny, project. It contains everything we don't want to admit about who we are. Rage, envy, shame, fear, selfishness. It's ugly, it's uncomfortable. And so, instead of facing it, we cast it outward. We see it in others. We accuse. We blame. And for people with strong egos or deep wounding, especially narcissists, that projection becomes constant, automatic, and unconscious. But here's the danger. Those projections need a container. And empaths become that container, not by choice but by design. You don't just sense others' emotions, you absorb them. But it's not a mystical power, it's a neurological response. Your mirror neurons are hyperactive. Your boundaries, psychological and energetic, are porous. You've been conditioned to merge with others to feel safe. And in that merging, you lose yourself. Jung discovered that empaths don't just carry their own wounds, they carry the collective's. When you walk into a room and feel sudden dread, you're tapping into psychic material that isn't personal, it's ancestral, societal, archetypal. You're absorbing echoes of repression that stretch back generations. But the unconscious doesn't distinguish between yours and theirs. That's the problem. It all feels real. It all feels personal. And so you spend your life trying to heal what was never yours, process what was never meant for you, solve problems rooted in someone else's psyche. No wonder shadow work feels impossible. You're navigating a labyrinth without a map. Every corner you turn, there's another projection to face, another false guilt, another layer of emotion without a clear source. And unless you wake up to what's really happening, you'll keep drowning in this sea of collective shadow. But awareness is the key. Once you realize you're not broken, but absorbing, everything changes. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What have I picked up?" And that shift is everything. Because the moment you see that you've been used as a projection screen, you can take yourself out of the role. You can stop being the sponge and start being the mirror. And here's the real truth. The world doesn't need more emotional sponges. It needs more conscious mirrors, people who have walked through the fire of shadow, separated truth from illusion, and come out clear. Empaths aren't here to carry the darkness of others. They're here to reflect it clearly, fiercely, and without apology. That's not cruelty. That's integrity. And it's the only path to real freedom. Individuation begins at the moment everything falls apart. When the betrayal cuts so deep it breaks not just your heart, but your illusion of reality itself. That moment when you finally see someone's true nature, not the mask they wore, not the story you told yourself, but the raw, unfiltered truth, and everything inside you screams because it's undeniable. That's not destruction. That's transformation beginning. The pain you feel is not a failure. It's alchemical fire. Jung called it the death of the personate mask you wore to survive, the identity you built around self-sacrifice, hyper-empathy, and the desperate hope that if you just loved enough, gave enough, absorbed enough, it would all be okay. But it wasn't, and it never could be, because the person you became to feel safe was never your true self. It was a survival adaptation, a response to a world that taught you your needs didn't matter, your pain didn't count, and your role was to carry everyone else's burdens. But when that mask breaks, so does the illusion. You stop pretending, you stop absorbing, and for the first time, you begin the painful, necessary work of separation, of asking, what is mine? What was theirs? What did I internalize because I didn't know how to say no? This separation, what the alchemists called separatio, brutal. You'll feel like you're losing everything. Because you are. You're losing false identities, unhealthy attachments, and the emotional toxins you've carried for years. But within that chaos is your raw material, your prima materia, the psychological lead that must be purified, piece by piece. Every emotion becomes a question. Every memory becomes a mirror. You'll start to realize how often you gave when you were empty, how often you said yes when you meant no, how many times you betrayed your own boundaries to maintain peace that only existed on the surface. And the more you dig, the more gold you uncover beneath the wreckage, because your sensitivity wasn't the problem, it was your compass, misused, misunderstood, weaponized by others, but never lost. As you move through this fire, something ancient awakens. You begin to reclaim your true self, not the empath identity, not the savior role, but the sovereign core that existed before all the programming. This is what Jung meant by individuation, not becoming someone new, but becoming who you truly are, free from the projections and expectations of others. You stop asking for permission to exist. You stop apologizing for your feelings. You no longer confuse love with martyrdom. And most importantly, you stop allowing others to define your worth by how much of their pain you can carry. Because you finally see the truth. You were never here to fix anyone. You were here to reflect back what they refused to see, and in doing so, become whole. Boundaries become sacred, not walls to keep people out, but vessels to hold your truth. You learn the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice, between empathy and self-erasure. You begin to choose when to engage, when to withdraw, and when to let people face the consequences of their own shadow. This isn't cruelty. This is clarity. You stop enabling dysfunction in the name of love. You stop absorbing chaos in the name of connection. And the more you integrate, the more powerful your presence becomes. Not because you try to be powerful, but because you are no longer hiding. And that presence, that clarity, that sovereignty is what terrifies those who once fed off your confusion. You become something new, not an emotional sponge, not a victim, but a conscious force, a walking boundary, a living truth. And when people try to project onto you now, it no longer sticks. You see it, you name it, and you hand it back. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with power. Because your energy is no longer available to hold what is not yours. Your nervous system is no longer a dumping ground, and your silence is no longer consent. You don't lose your sensitivity. You master it. It becomes precise, sharp, surgical. You feel everything, but you no longer become it. You witness pain without losing yourself in it. You hold space without collapsing. You love with depth, but with limits. Your compassion has roots now. It doesn't float in guilt or obligation. It's anchored in truth. And in that anchoring, something extraordinary happens. You begin to mirror reality with such clarity that everything false begins to fall away. That's the moment the world changes around you. Not because you changed others, but because you changed yourself. People can no longer manipulate you, not because they stopped trying, but because you stopped participating. Their projections fall flat. Their rage loses its grip. Their shame boomerangs back into their own awareness. Because your energy has become sovereign. And in a world built on projection, sovereignty is revolution. When this happens, you don't just heal, you become dangerous. Not in the violent sense, but in the transformational sense. You are no longer afraid of truth, and you no longer protect illusions. You walk into rooms and people feel it. Your presence triggers awareness. Your words dismantle denial. Not because you attack, but because you see. And when you see clearly, others can't unsee themselves in your mirror. This is the power of the individuated empath. You don't absorb anymore. You reflect with precision. And that reflection forces evolution whether people are ready or not. But it doesn't end with you. Because once you reach this stage, you begin to realize that your transformation is not isolated. Jung saw it in myth, in dreams, in cultures across time. When one person integrates their shadow, it creates a ripple in the collective unconscious. You've felt this before when someone deeply grounded enters a space and everything shifts. That's not magic. That's resonance. That's what happens when someone becomes a mirror of truth. They activate something in others. And as more empaths rise into sovereignty, that activation spreads, not through force, but through frequency. This is what Jung called a constellation. When multiple awakened individuals occupy the same space, a field emerges, a psychic space where illusions break, masks fall, and only truth can exist. These fields change rooms, change families, change generations, not because they preach, but because they are. Consciousness cannot remain asleep in the presence of someone who has become fully themselves. The age of absorption is over. The era of sovereign mirrors has begun. Every empath who completes this journey becomes a living update to the human operating system. Every moment of integration sends new code into the collective field code that says, it is possible to feel everything and still remain whole. It is possible to love deeply without losing yourself. It is possible to be sensitive and still set fire to illusion. You are no longer here to carry pain that was never yours. You are here to reflect it back with such clarity that others are forced to meet themselves. That is your gift. That is your role. And that is the kind of power the world has never known what to do with. But it's the kind of power the world needs now more than ever. Because the empath who has awakened is no longer a refuge for projection. They are the end of denial, the catalyst of transformation, the mirror of what's real. And in their presence, everything false begins to collapse.